Well, good morning again and welcome to NorthPoint Church. My name is Jay Quick, and still today I am the student ministry director, though that's soon going to be expiring. I'll be still at the church working on a few other various roles. But man, it's exciting that it's Senior Sunday. It's a privilege for me. It's actually my 10th Senior Sunday that I've been a part of here at NorthPoint Church. And so fun to think back through the years of our students and the growth and the peaks and the valleys and all the stuff that's happened in between. Fun to look back on some of that stuff. But there's this profound mystery that I've been thinking about this past week. Over the course of the last 10 years, where I'm like, how come every year the students just keep getting younger? What's going on with that? Some kind of age thing going on. I can't quite figure that one out. But we were at a wedding a few years back, and there were some of our former youth students that were there. They're getting married. We were at a table at a reception with some former youth group kids that are part of our youth group. And I'll never forget, one of the female youth students looks across the table, dead in my eyes, and starting to talk to my wife, Stacy, and I, and she says, "What's it feel like to be at the young people's table?" And I'm like, we're not always part of that? What's going on here? So that was kind of fun experience to look back on somewhat. But man, not only is it Senior Sunday, but it's also Memorial Day weekend. So we do want to say a special shout out and thank you to those who have served and are currently serving. We are so thankful for all you do. Absolutely. Yeah, we thank you for our freedom that we have. Absolutely excited about that. A little tie-in with Memorial Day. Back to World War II, I wanted to show you actually a poster that's from that. You'll see a picture of that on the screen. But this is a poster back from World War II. You might think that it happened just a couple of decades ago because it came really popular. But this poster is actually from 1939. The British government designed a series of 3 different tactics to boost the morale of their people during World War II. They thought, how can we keep our people excited, engaged, and pressing on? Well, they said, let's make some phrases. We'll plaster them all over the cities. We'll hang them on light posts, shop store windows, whatever we got to do. We're going to boost the morale of our people, keep calm, and carry on. Well, this was like the bullpen closer for things when they got really bad. They were thinking, man, hey, when the war gets worse, when the aerial bombings really start happening in our area, we want to bring these out to say, hey, keep going. Don't get discouraged. Keep calm and carry on. They ended up printing about 2.5 million copies of this poster to be plastered all over Great Britain and the other surrounding areas. And the bombing, thankfully, didn't get as bad as they expected it to in this area, so they kind of sat on the shelves. Not many of these posters were actually hung up. Fast forward about 60-some years, there's a bookseller who starts going through various books and collecting dust off things, and he pulls out these books, and then on the bottom of that, on his bookshelf, he finds a copy of this poster. Keep calm and carry on. And so in the last couple decades, this has cycled through all kinds of t-shirts, posters, paintings, you name it. It's all over the place. And there's other variations of that too that I thought were pretty exciting. One of them I saw online. We'll keep it PG with some of them that we saw because it is church. But it said, keep calm and drink coffee, right? My coffee lovers out there, it's like, hey, it's not morning yet unless we get our coffee in us. So yes, no matter what comes our way, coffee, we're going to do this thing. Maybe one of my favorites that I saw was keep calm and eat a donut. Yes, everybody loves donuts, and if you don't, you're probably not welcome here. Go ahead. No, I'm just kidding. You can still come here, but man, why don't you like donuts? Come on, man. Keep calm and eat a donut. Another one, or variations of a joke of that, it said, I can't keep calm. It's an election year. Yeah, maybe you can relate to a little bit of that. Some things in America a little tense the last decade or so, an election year, kind of a play on words out of that one, different variations of that. But I think one of the original messages of that actually came from Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy. And he said a message like this, be strong and carry on. We're going to be in 2 Timothy today. If you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and open those. Chair Bible in front of you will be on page 964. If you have your own Bible, to find 1 and 2 Timothy, I always struggle. But it's after the Inthians, like the Ians of those things. You think about Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. You're going to find those. Then you're going to get to 1 and 2 Thessalonians, those big T words in there. And then 1 and 2 Timothy, the second letter that Paul wrote to Timothy is where we're going to be spending our time today, 2 Timothy chapter 2 specifically. But before we get there, I want to just take a little bit of context. We've been in this Acts series, and now we're jumping over for Senior Sunday to 2 Timothy. We're going to talk about that here now today. But part of the context of this is that the Apostle Paul wrote this in prison. This is actually the last letter that we get from the Apostle Paul. He's chained. We read in chapter 2, verse 9, that he's actually chained. We see from the Apostle Paul that he has been to the city of Ephesus. He knows what's happening, and so his purpose for writing this book is twofold. It's really encouragement to Timothy to keep going, to be strong, and to carry on. But But he's also saying to Timothy, man, I want to reinforce your commitment to the gospel because there is all shapes and sizes of things out there in this world, in this city of Ephesus. They're going to try to take you away from the gospel. Timothy, be strong and carry on amidst temptation and discomfort and hardship. Keep going. And why he said that is because Paul himself described the city of Ephesus in the Ephesians like this, Ephesians 4:19. He said, they're ones who had given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity. And they were full of greed. Now, talking about the city of Ephesus for a moment, ancient Ephesus, it was a major port city. It was actually known as the first and greatest metropolis, meaning the greatest city, the largest city. There's about 250,000 people in this city of Ephesus, and man, they were wealthy. Like they had a lot going for them because people would bring ships in, the sailors would come in, they'd bring all kinds of trades from their regions of the world, and they would also travel by land to get all the way to the city of Ephesus to make trades, to make a profit. So they would literally bring a boatload of stuff, they would make a bunch of money on the stuff that they would sell, and then some of the profit that they had, they would buy other various things like spices from other regions of the world, fill up their boat, bring it back home, and they're making money on the stuff going into Ephesus and on the way out of Ephesus. It was a city full of greed, full of money, full of power and prestige. It was a great city in the first century. But that wasn't the only thing and the temptation that Timothy had amidst him and opposition that he had. There was also sexual immorality that was rampant. It was kind of like a Vegas vibe, if you're tracking with me. It was kind of a whatever happens in the city of Ephesus is going to stay in the city of Ephesus. I was there a few years ago, and while we were journeying on a tour through the ancient ruins, it's actually a magnificent place you can travel to. You can see tons of the ancient ruins here and now, still today. And as you're going through there, a tour guide said, hey, whoa. Go ahead and take a look down at your feet. I'm like, why are we looking at what's here? I mean, all this cool stuff around us. So we take a look down, you'll see a picture of what I saw on the screen. He says, hey, tell me what you see. I said, well, I kind of see like a heart thing, like on the left a little bit, and I kind of see this left foot. There looks to be like some guy with a mohawk maybe faintly on the right. And yeah, that's kind of what I see. He goes, well, what do you think that is? And I said, I have no idea. And he goes, this is actually instructions of how to make your way towards the brothel. As sailors will enter their way through the village, still 2,000 years ago, it's imprinted in the road. You can see it with your very own eyes today. The heart is saying, if you want to buy the love of a woman, take the left turn at the cross section next to the library and you'll find it there. And so anyone walking into the city, anyone walking out of the city, all of the women and children and people of Ephesus, they would see this. It was almost like the neon lights trying to draw people in each and every day. And if you were one who kind of cared about what people thought of you, actually they later discovered underneath the library, which is one of the greatest libraries in that day and age, there was an underground tunnel from the library if you needed a study break to make your way towards the brothel. And so it was in their faces. Money, power, prestige, sexuality. But not just that, it goes on a little bit further. Acts chapter 19, we learn about magical practices. We hear this story in Acts 19 where Paul and some other people are there and they began to have some converts within the early church. And some of the converts began to come to know Jesus. And what they do one day is they have a giant bonfire. They take all their scrolls from their witchcraft and their wizardry and their sorcery, and they bring them in and they throw them on a pile and they light them all on fire. And I tell you that because this was deeply entrenched in who they were. So much so, the text tells us that there was 50,000 drachmas worth of scrolls burned that day. That's the equivalent to 5 million American dollars here now today. A $5 million bonfire is what they had. And they go there and they're not going to say, hey, we're going to sell it for half price to those other people so we can still be rich. They're saying, no, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and we want to follow him, and no matter what the cost, we're going to burn $5 million worth of stuff. We want to get rid of our former life. We want to follow Jesus. Later on in Acts chapter 19, there's a story of a guy named Demetrius. It wasn't just witchcraft and wizardry and sorcery. They had a proud group of Ephesians who was entrenched within their Greek culture where they worshiped the Greek god Artemis, Artemis of the Ephesians. That she dwelled in a temple there. It was actually one of the original ancient wonders of the world. Although it's not much to look at today. They burned it down. There's like one pillar. So don't go and see it today. But it is still standing, that one pillar. But at the time, man, you traveled from all over the world to see it. You were so excited to come see this. And just as the Jews had week-long festivals in the city of Jerusalem, people would travel miles and miles to celebrate Artemis of the Ephesians. It was so entrenched in their culture, and the Ephesians were proud that Artemis dwelled among them. And not only that, they made a living off of this Greek goddess Artemis. You'll see on the screen here, there's a picture of a coin. Demetrius was a silversmith. He sold things like this, like shrines, like coins that people could kind of worship. You'll see Artemis's face on the left. She was the goddess of the hunt, which was one of the things she was known for. You'll see a deer on the right side there. People carried this with them for good luck charms. They worshiped them. They spent a ton of money at silversmiths like Demetrius to make a living. And so these people were wealthy, of all these people who traveled miles and miles and miles, and they wanted favor from the Greek god of Artemis, and so they'd buy stuff and they'd worship this Greek goddess in the city there. And so this day that Paul's walking through the city in Acts chapter 19, all of a sudden, Demetrius is kind of like, hey, what the heck, man? Like these Christians, they're taking my business. And not only that, Paul claims that our God is made with human hands. What's the deal about this? So they start this little circle, and they kind of get angry, and they say, we want our money back, man. Like, I'm losing business. They're defaming our goddess who's in our culture. What's the deal? And he shouts out, he goes, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And the text says that there's an uproar within the city. The entire city uproars, and 20,000+ people make their way to the amphitheater, and they fill the amphitheater. And if you're curious about what 20,000 people look like, think about Matt Campbell, pre-Matt Campbell, Iowa State football. It's about half the stadium, 20,000 people. That's about how we filled the stadium, pre-Matt Campbell. So about 20,000 there. So they're in the stadium, and here's what's going on. They're chanting for 2 hours. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And they are passionate about their Greek goddess. So there's sexual immorality amidst them. There's a Greek goddess, there's witchcraft, there's wizardry, there's wealth beyond what you could imagine. And Paul's writing this letter to Timothy to encourage him to say, Timmy, be strong. Carry on, buddy. I know this life's difficult. Timmy, be strong and carry on. Over 20 different times, he gives them this message in the book of 2 Timothy. I'll just read a couple of those for you. Chapter 1, verses 6 through 8 says, for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying of hands. For the Spirit of God did not give us, or for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So do not be ashamed of the gospel, Timothy. Timothy, be strong. Don't be timid. I know there's opposition to the gospel. Timmy, do not be timid. Fan into flame the gift that God has given you. Chapter 1, verse 14, guard the good deposit that was entrusted to you. Guard it with the help of the Holy Spirit who lives in us. Timmy, I know there's going to be temptations. Timmy, I know members of your church are not attending anymore. They're having study breaks. They're doing that thing. Timmy, don't lose focus. Timothy, be strong and carry on. And if somebody tells you something, a message, 20-some different times, a couple of things are probably going to happen. Number one, you're probably going to say, hey, whatever they're telling me is probably going to be true. So this life, this following Jesus thing, which he's already experienced, but he knows even more is yet to come, it's going to be hard. So Timothy, be strong. Carry on, Timmy. Be strong and carry on. But if somebody tells you to be strong 20 different times, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling weakness. Somebody's telling me to be strong over and over and over. I'm likely being told that because I'm weary, I'm tired, and I'm exhausted. And we don't know this for sure. But we know the work of the gospel in Ephesus was hard, much opposition to it in multiple facets. And I imagine that Timothy got this scroll as the mailman comes up, picks up his satchel. He goes and he gives a scroll to Timothy, and he opens it and he goes, it's from my buddy Paul. And I imagine, I would bet he's reading this with tears in his eyes going, man, Paul's still alive. They haven't killed him off yet. Paul's still alive. These are some of the last words that he might write. And I bet he's clinging to this scroll because he's weak. He's tired. He feels like throwing in the towel. He feels like he's lost another one to the city and to the ways of the world. And if he's honest with himself, he feels tempted to. I don't know about you this morning. Have you ever felt tired in this gospel life? Not to raise a hand, but I sure have. There's times where I'm just like, man, How do I be a good father? How do I be a good husband? How do I love my children? How do I love my neighbors? How do I serve the church? How do I serve people that don't even like me? How do I do this? How do I have conversations? How do I handle conflict? God, I feel tired. I don't want to keep going. I'll be honest with you, there's days where I've thought about, should I write my resignation letter? God, what do you want me to do? Not because of things that have happened to the staff or church members, just because I'm tired. And then even me personally, I read this letter of 2 Timothy and it's words of life, which I imagine that Paul got when he wrote to him. And Timothy gets this letter and he's clinging to it and he goes, words of life are washing over my soul. And in verse 1, he gets this word in chapter 2. He says, you then, my son. Now imagine your hero, the guy that you look up to. That's my boy, Timmy, my son. Be strong. Buckle up your bootstraps, buddy. Try harder, be better, do more. No, that's not the message. It wasn't do more, buckle up, try harder. It wasn't be strong alone. It was you then, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Now, Timmy, remember this. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. I love the way that the NLT version says this. You'll see a picture of that on the screen. My grace is all you need. My power works best in your weakness. Timmy, you being weak is the best place to start because your ministry doesn't depend upon you. Timmy, lean into the grace. Be strong. Be strong in the grace that is Jesus, Timothy. And guess what? Don't do this on yourself. Here's the game plan. Timmy, verse 2, and the things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. Timmy, don't do this thing on your own. Don't isolate yourself because that's when the enemy loves to pick you off. Timmy, entrust this to other people for the sake of the gospel, but your gospel witness as well. You cannot do this on your own. Surround yourself in community. Timmy, be strong and carry on. Pass this message on. In verse 3, we get a series of things that Paul says to Timothy, that he encourages him with 3 distinct examples that I want to focus on this morning. Number 1 happens in verse 3. He says, join me in suffering like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. And I think the thing that he's saying here is to be like the dedicated soldier. Timmy, when you lose focus, be like the dedicated soldier. And the thing about the dedicated soldier is this. There's an awareness that there's a battle and a war happening. Timmy, don't forget that you're in a battle every single day, not only for your life, but the lives around you for the sake of the gospel. Timmy, be aware of the battle. Now imagine this for a moment. Imagine you're enlisted in the military, you're enlisted in the army, you're doing your thing, you got your helmet on, you got your camouflage, you got your weapon, feeling pretty tough, and you're sitting in your bunker, and all of a sudden, bang, 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 bullets are flying over your head, and all of a sudden, you're like Forrest Gump style, like booking it out of there, like, no, peace, I didn't know there's gonna be gunshots, and you run over to your commanding officer, and you say, they're shooting at me over there. And the commanding officer goes, huh? What? It's a battle, dude. You're in a war, soldier. What? Why are you surprised that the enemy is shooting at you? Timmy, don't be surprised that you're in a battle each and every day. We read in the Bible that the enemy is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking to destroy the things of God, including you and me. The enemy wants to take us out. And we're surprised by that. And one of its greatest tactics isn't, hey, on the way home from church today, stop for drugs. No, it's just stupid, right? Like most of us, we know better. We have our downfalls, we have our things. But his thing here is he's saying, Timothy, one of the greatest tactics is to forget that you're even in a battle. The enemy's going, shh, just go to sleep. You don't need to love your neighbor, just rest. You don't need to love your spouse, just kind of, don't need to serve people. Timmy, shh, don't forget about the battle. This life's about you. And his tactic is this. He's getting us to spend our time, our energy, and resources on temporary things as we build our own little kingdoms over here, all the while he's making us useful for God's kingdom over here. He's saying, think about temporary stuff. Get entangled in those things. Shh. You didn't think about the gospel? Carry on. Just do your thing. He's saying, Timothy, remember you're in a battle each and every day. And I think what he's telling us here now today is, church, there's a reason the enemy wants to destroy your marriage. You're in a battle. Timothy, Church, man, there's a reason he wants to put a divide between you and your children. For the sake of the gospel, he doesn't want it to go anywhere. Timothy, there's a reason. Church, there's a reason that he's challenging your singleness. We're in a battle. And he's saying, remember that there's a battle out there, Timothy. Be strong and carry on in that battle. And he also goes on to say this in verse 4, no one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but rather tries to please his commanding officer. What he's saying here is there's going to be tons of people out there. There's going to be tons of civilians doing their own thing, marching to the beat of their own drum, but remember who enlisted you. And may your cause be singular. May it be to please your commanding officer. Don't fall for the schemes of this world. You know, I was thinking this week, I've seen so oftentimes, and even myself included, we can get sucked up in the church to get in senseless arguments, which it talks about later in chapter 2, especially on social media. Like you see people commenting back and forth, well, I think this, no, you're an idiot, no, you. And it's like, don't get involved in civilian affairs. Have you ever met anybody that's gone, you know what? That last week we got in an argument on Facebook and I changed my opinion. Said no one ever. Nobody does that. He says, don't get wasted in these civilian affairs. May your cause be singular, Timmy. May it be to please your commanding officer. Don't get wrapped up in wealth, the city of Ephesus. Don't get wrapped up in the temptations and all the other things, the ways of the world. Timmy, be strong and carry on in the gospel. Be like the dedicated soldier. Don't get tied up in civilian affairs. He continues here with his next point about the disciplined athlete. In verse 5, he says, similar to anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive the victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. So what Paul's saying to Timothy here is he's saying, don't disqualify yourself. Don't take a shortcut, Timmy. I know that there's temptations left and right and all around you. Timothy, keep your eyes fixated like the disciplined athlete does on his crown. Keep pressing forward. Imagine this for a moment. Imagine this. I know you guys are all runners out there. Imagine that you qualified for the Olympics, the 400-meter dash. Just one lap around the track. You're out there for the Olympics and the 400-meter dash, and you're getting ready. You're stretching out. You're like, all right, I'm going to win this thing. Here we go. You get in the blocks, and you're in lane 4, and it's ready, set, go. Bang, and you're out there. You're out of the gates, and you're blitzing around that 100-meter dash. And as you're already gassed 100 meters in, you're like, dude, I'm in dead last. They're way ahead of me. And you get this brilliant idea. Like, oh, the finish line is over there to the left. And you just dart across the infield. And you just start running across that infield. And you're like, booyah, across the tape first, baby. Numero uno, number 1. I'm awesome. And everyone's looking like, what are you doing? Wait, I got first place. Isn't the point of the race, to cross the finish line first? That's what I did. Number 1, baby. People think, what are you doing? You got to stay in your lane. You can't break the rules. You can't live however you want. Well, I crossed the tape and finished first. World record. No, Timmy, you got to play according to the rules. He's saying, Timmy, if you want to be on God's team, you got to play according to his set of rules. You got to be disciplined like the athlete. You got to stay focused. And discipline is going to help you. Here's the deal about discipline. Discipline is not going to save you, but discipline will shape you. And it's these disciplines that help us get to where we want to go in this life. It doesn't earn God's favor. Dallas Willard said it like this: grace is opposed to our earning. We cannot earn God's favor. We cannot earn salvation. We cannot earn God's love. But grace is not opposed to our effort. So what he's telling him here is he's saying, Timmy, be strong in the grace of Jesus. Get the grace part down. Without the grace part, you're not going to last. Be strong in the grace of Jesus. But this carry on part requires a little bit of you. As you look to Jesus with the help of the Holy Spirit, it's going to take some work. You know, I heard an interview a few weeks back about some spring updates of the Iowa football team. The quarterback's on the line, and they're talking to him and said, hey, man, tell us about somebody this year who you're super excited about. Who's somebody that you were like pumped up to see? And he goes, there's this offensive lineman. You wouldn't believe it. He has gained so much weight. He has put in so much time in the weight room, and he drinks 14 protein shakes a day. And you're going, wow, that's quite a few protein shakes. And the radio show host goes, 14 a day? Isn't he going to get a kidney stone? What is he, crazy? And he goes, I asked him the same thing. I said, hey, are you afraid of getting a kidney stone? And his response was this: I'd rather be big and have a kidney stone than be small and not have one. And it's like, okay, I guess. And I guess that's the secret to why Iowa beats Iowa State and Nebraska every year. They get kidney stones. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know why. But here's the deal. He is not taking shortcuts. He could decide to juice up. He could take steroids. He could take the shortcut. He could get big. But you do that, you get an asterisk next to your name. You're disqualified. You can't compete. And what he's saying, Timothy, have the discipline of the athlete. And I think that's cool, the message of grace here. If you're like, dude, I've already been disqualified too many times. Well, I think we jump down to verse 13. Even if, it says verse 13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful. For he cannot disown himself. So if you're like, man, I've already screwed up, I've already done this thing. Even if we're faithless, God is still faithful. It's not a salvation issue. But it has to be our motivation by grace to be disciplined, to stay the course. Timothy, you want to finish this race? You got to stay disciplined. Don't be like those other people who have been knocked out by moral failures. Timothy, stay the course. Be strong and carry on. The next thing in verse 6 that he challenges them with is this. He says, the hardworking farmer should be first to receive a share of the crops. And here's the thing. If you take a look at the farmer, and compare them to the other two for just a moment. We have the athlete and we have the soldier. And in most cases, man, our culture celebrates these things. And for good reason. We celebrate our military. We celebrate athletes. But not very often is it that Farmer John gets an interview, does he? Like nobody's out interviewing Farmer John on the side going, hey, how'd it go last week on the farm, Farmer John? Well, I fended off 2 coyotes that tried to get in the chicken coop and it's quite the week, And it's like, well, nobody does that. Nobody's rushing to get the autograph of a farmer. Nobody does that. But we appreciate their work. We like their food. We don't get their autographs. We don't interview them. What Paul's saying to Timothy here is he's saying, hey, buddy, if you want the applause of human hands, maybe choose a different profession. Nobody in the city of Ephesus is going to be clapping you on as you cheer and care and love the widows and the orphans. Not going to get a lot of applause for that. So if you're looking for the applause of man, if you're looking for a big stage to be a big shot, it's not about that. This is about Jesus. Be strong in his grace. Carry on. Don't let your pride get in the way. Stay like the diligent and faithful farmer. I think another thing about farming that we see is that, especially in the state of Iowa, man, you never know what your crops are going to yield, right? I mean, we have different tactics that we do. Our farmers could tell you all about it. All the planting that we do and the watering and tilling the field, all these amazing things. But at the end of the day, we don't always control the growth. Because we have this thing called weather in the state of Iowa, right? We have tornadoes, and we figured out that we have derechos, and we have droughts, and we have different floods. We've got all kinds of stuff going on out there. And I think what he's reminding Timothy of is you be faithful, Timothy. You be faithful to plant the seeds of the gospel in people's lives. Don't worry about the growth. That's God's job. God's going to give growth. You keep watering. You keep planting. You keep loving. Timothy, be strong and carry on. And I think so oftentimes in our lives we can get discouraged when maybe we don't see fruit. We're serving people. We're loving our neighbors. And it's just like we can just get rejected. It's like, is this doing anything? And the good news for us and what Paul is telling Timothy and what the message for the church is that it matters. And God gives the growth. God's the one in charge of that. Our call is to be like the faithful, diligent farmer, to keep pressing on. Even when we're tired, we look to the grace of Jesus and we carry on. One thing that I like to look to, the 3 examples here that we have, we think about the dedicated soldier, we think about the disciplined athlete, we think about the diligent farmer. All 3 of them have one thing in common. Though they're vastly different, they have one thing in common. They're looking forward to what's to come, aren't they? The soldier, when the going gets tough, many have heard interviews from soldiers coming back from war. They're like, man, I had my wife and my children on my mind. Like I couldn't wait for that white flag to raise, for the enemy to surrender. And I couldn't wait to get home and see my wife and children. I couldn't wait to get a hug from my daughter. I couldn't wait to see my family. Their eyes are fixed on the day of victory. And when the going gets tough, they keep their eyes up to look forward. And the same is true for us, isn't it? Victory happened 2,000 years ago on the cross in the form of Jesus' death, where we received life because of what he had done. And his death, burial, and resurrection wasn't then the enemy's scheme to go, oh shoot, he raised again. The enemy's defeated. And there's also going to be a day where everything's restored. And we on this side of the cross, we look forward to that. Don't you? We long for the day where there's no more tears. We long for the day where our bodies are restored. We're reunited with loved ones, and we're face to face with the author and the creator of our faith and his whole and perfect love. We're going to be there. And when the going gets tough, we fix our eyes on the victory. And when the enemy raises that white flag and when Jesus triumphs at the end of the time, I can't wait for that day. It's also here in the disciplined athlete. He keeps his eyes on the crown. See, everybody wants to be like the athlete, but very few want to put in the work ethic of the athlete. I mean, you see some of these guys were like, you do 3 a days? I'm trying to do like 3 a month, man. Like, this is tough. It's hard work. Everybody wants the prize, but not many people want to put in the work. And I was thinking about this. I ran the Grand Blue Mile race with my son last week. It was a mile race downtown. And we're getting there, and earlier in the day, he was scootering around the block, and like 2 houses in, he's in the ground flailing like, I'm tired, Mom. We're like, how is he going to do a mile? How's this going to work? I don't know. We're going to pray. Hopefully he gets there. Hopefully he finishes, right? So we got this Grand Blue Mile race, and I got like gummy bears in my pocket, like, come on, dude, like keep running, And I'm like, whatever it takes, we're going to finish that line. And man, he blitzed through that race. It was so fun to run it with him, but there was about a 1/4 mile left. A little less than that, and we're on the final straightaway. It's a long stretch downtown. And as we're looking down the straightaway, he could see the blue banner. He could see it. I'm going, buddy, you see that out there? It's a finish line, isn't it? And you know what happens when we cross that finish line? Your mama's there. Your sisters are going to be there. Mimi and Papa are there. Buddy, there's going to be Gatorade and snacks beyond your wildest imagination. It's going to be awesome. And I'll tell you what, man, he picked up his legs, red face and everything. He's just blitzing it the rest of the way. And he didn't stop another step the rest of that race. And he's running along, and he's a big Iowa Hawkeye fan like me, and there's mascots there. And he sees Herky, and I'm like, buddy, it's Herky. And Herky's kind of running with him, waving like this. He's like, Dad, that's civilian affairs. Don't get entangled now. We got a race to run. Keep running. And he ran across that line. And isn't that our faith journey? Man, we get tired, we get distracted. We feel like throwing in the towel. We feel like we can't keep going on. And then we look at what's to come. The eternal crown. Man, we gotta keep running our race. He's saying, Timothy, saying, church, be strong in the grace. Be strong and carry on. I know it's tough. Timothy, I know it's difficult. I know you're tempted. I know you're tired. Timothy, for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of people around you, be strong and carry on. The same message of the harvesting farmer, the diligent farmer, man, they work night and day. And it's not to be like, oh, we move some dirt today. No, they keep their eyes on the harvest of what's to come. And they wait for that and they work for that. And they keep going. They be strong and they carry on. And as I think about those 3 things, as I think about those 3 qualities, I want to just wrap up with this. Is there somebody in your life that you feel like emulates those things? Is there somebody around you maybe that lives their life like the dedicated soldier, like the disciplined athlete, like the diligent farmer? Is there somebody in your life that you maybe can think of? And if there is, I want to challenge you. How can you get as in close of proximity as you possibly can to that person, so that you can continue to be strong and to carry on? Check this out in verse 8 of chapter 2. Verse 8 says this, remember Jesus Christ. Timothy, remember him, the guy that lived and walked the earth for 30 some years. Remember that guy. He was crucified, and guess what? He was raised from the dead. His buried body was in the grave. Timothy, don't live as if our Savior's still there. He's risen. Timothy, be strong and carry on in this grace. But I also think there's an additional reminder here. He then goes on and he says this is my gospel for which I am suffering, even to the point of being chained like a criminal. But God's word is not chained. Therefore, I endure everything for the sake of the elect. I endure everything, Timothy, for the sake of the gospel. Not only is Timothy inspired by the grace and the salvation in Christ Jesus, he's looking to his buddy Paul going, that guy's about to finish his race. Man, I want to be like that. I strive to live my life motivated by the gospel, but as I'm in close proximity, man, I want to be like Paul. I imagine that's what Timothy thought. And if you don't have anybody like that in your life that you can't get in close proximity to, maybe start praying that God would give you somebody to do that with. Because man, this life is tough, isn't it? But to be strong and to carry on, we do that in community. I've been blessed to have a number of people that I've walked this faith journey with, and one of them was a guy named Papa Floyd. Back in 2010, I met Floyd. He was a 60-some-year-old guy, And he began to mentor me in this relationship that he poured into my relationship with Jesus with. And I was like, man, that guy, he really believes this stuff. He really believes in Jesus. Like in every area of his life, he was a missionary in the red light district in Amsterdam. Some of his stories, man, you're like, whoa, how did you keep going on? You were beat down each and every day amidst temptation. How'd you do it? Kept his eyes fixed on Jesus. He was a disciplined athlete, dedicated soldier, diligent farmer, eyes on the harvest. He was a missionary in Afghanistan. He loved some of the toughest people in the world. And then he was in Cape Town, where I lived for about a year and a half. And as he was there, I've got this stained in my mind. As Papa Floyd, we had this old kind of rickety old garage where we would worship and have a little bit of teaching in. And I remember Papa Floyd, he's this big 6'6" guy. We call him the BFG, the big friendly giant. He was kind of this tall, skinny guy, except he had a belly. He'd just kind of teach up there with his hands on his chest like this. And he'd just smile. And we would sing this song, which seemed like a million times, this old song, 10,000 Reasons, Bless the Lord, oh my soul. Maybe you remember that back in 2011, 12, 13. We would sing this song with a guy who could hardly play the guitar, a guy who was half a beat off in the djembe. You know, the worship was not really good. But Floyd would just stand up there, arms raised high. I'd just look at him and go, man, that guy believes it. That guy's lived it. God, help me live like your son, Jesus. But man, that guy's doing it. I want to be dedicated like him. I want to be diligent like him. I want to be disciplined like that guy. And as he taught me so many things about following Jesus, I remember he'd get up there, his hands on his chest, and he'd begin his teachings, half the time with tears in his eyes after worship, and he'd just go, I love Jesus. Oh, I love Jesus. Do you love Jesus? He's so good, isn't he? He's so good. And I remembered and I watched his faith closely, and I took notes on him. And still to this day, when I feel like throwing in the towel, absolutely I look to Jesus. Be strong in the grace of Jesus. But as I carry on, I look to Papa Floyd and I go, man, that dude finished his life well. He could have retired. He could have been living on a beach. But he was investing in the lives of others to multiply the gospel. He was a guy who lived and was strong. Be strong, church, and carry on the sake of the gospel. Would you pray with me?